Welcome to another episode of Living with FASD, an educational human interest show for those affected by prenatal exposure to alcohol, their families and loved ones, and anyone else interested in learning. I'm your host, Patty Casper, bringing you both professional and living experience with FASD. And I am beyond excited today to introduce you to Dr. Susan Rich. She is, and I'm going to be glancing at the jacket of her book because it's summarized perfectly. She is a psychiatrist and public health entrepreneur specializing in the diagnosis, treatment, and prevention of neurodevelopmental disorder associated with prenatal alcohol exposure. And we've been hearing so much more about NDPAE lately, it seems. So Susan's worked since 1993 to raise awareness in the medical community, with policymakers, with community leaders about this misunderstood and under-recognized condition. And I could go on and on. You also have a nonprofit, Seventh Generation Foundation. So
Yeah.
I'm really interested in the name, how you came about that too. But Susan, welcome to Living with FASD. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you, Patty. I'm really delighted that you were persistent and we finally managed to make the time work. I appreciate your patience.
Well, they say good things are worth waiting for, right? So, and this just from our pre-recording conversation, this episode is going to be a doozy. I'm really excited. So just to get my milder curiosities out of the way, Seventh Generation Foundation, what's that about?
Well, I am Iroquois myself from the Tuscarora tribe of North Carolina. And years ago, I had a little consulting business, is how I paid my way through public health school, and then medical school was writing grants for other people. And it was called Seventh Generation Consultants. The idea is an Iroquois kind of ideology that says we are the seventh generation that came since colonialism, and there are seven to come that we are responsible for. So we are the seventh generation, and as the seventh generation, we're responsible for seven more to come. So our actions today affect seven in the future, and we do know that's true based on epigenetics and based on preconceptional factors. So
I love it when science backs up tradition.
Yeah, and trauma, that's exactly right. We now know with, families that have repeated generations of trauma, that if one generation can stop it, you've probably seen the meme where there's several people lined up in a row and one yelling at the next and the next and the next. And then there's one that just has like a Captain America shield against it. And then he's allowing his child to parent his child with grace and with dignity and respect and caring, loving. So we can, at any point in this journey that we have with, all the generations, we can stop and say, hey, are we doing the right thing? And I think really that speaks to seventh generation, speaks also to environmental sustainability and restorative agriculture, which are very much a part of what we're doing here at Dream Catcher Meadows, which is the farm that I established from the nonprofit. So Seventh Generation Foundation is doing business as Dream Catcher Meadows on this property.
Okay, that's exciting. So I guess we might as well start our conversation there. What all do you do on your property?
Well, so I have two different businesses that actually run on this one tiny little farm. It's a 6.5 acre farm, nestled kind of in Potomac, Maryland. It is a 1953 farm, which means it was a little, rusty and, kind of a tiny bit rough behind the ears when I bought it. But we've nurtured it along the way. I have my private practice, which runs on 1 acre, which is my business. I've always had a private practice in my home since I started my practice in 2006. I live 2 miles from here on a different property, on 1 acre property. So really just migrating that practice to this location, and rehabilitating the home to be able to account for that. And then I lease over for $0, 5.5. It's really 5.43 of the 6.43 acres to the nonprofit to operate the Green Care Farm Animal Sanctuary, where we have 15 now hand-raised goats, 2 ponies, an Irish draft horse, all of which, the horse has a injury, so he had to, come here. The 2 ponies came from a pony riding place in West Virginia, near Charlestown, West Virginia. The woman felt
Charleston.
where the women felt like they weren't really being well cared for, and they were overridden by children that were way too large to be on them. And so she took them to her farm, and during COVID, because her parents were elderly, she was spending too much time with her parents and not enough time with the ponies. So she brought him here. And then we have a pig named Noah. He's really lovely, and he has his own little paddock now. And now 2 emus that we just got back in May, and we've hand raised them from 10 weeks to be able to bond with people, and they're imprinted on me. So whenever I whistle, they come, and children really like it because they're like these unusual little creatures. And I can teach the children about, caring for animals, but also caring for themselves, because we have an emu brain, we have a chicken brain deep in our brain, which is our brain stem. And, when you see the emus running around with the zoomies and they're, all active, you can show them how similar that is to them. And then we have a lot of chickens, which, really does help with what's called theory of mind, when you're explaining theory of mind to people, because you can interpret what the chickens might be saying as they peck and cluck and, scratch around in the coop, or when the rooster is kind of calling out, what do you think he might be meaning? And a lot of kids who are neurodiverse, it's hard for them to appreciate somebody else's view. And just being able to interact with these animals on that level helps a lot of kids. But the nonprofit is totally separate from my practice. However, we do occasionally walk down, I might walk down if a child wants to, if their parent says, hey, my child really loves animals. They've been having a hard time connecting with other therapists, other psychiatrists. Maybe the child has a trauma history or attachment issues. A lot of times we'll take the parents with us, and the parents will interact. And then we, through the nonprofit, have a Earth Keepers program. So in addition to, helping the animals, we can then bring in groups of 8 to 12-year-olds, which we're about to expand to some of the local school systems, so that we can have, we've just put a driveway in down to the barn area, and we're putting a welcome center so that schools can come in and have children interact. And it's very much similar to farm in Canada called Nourishing Hearts Wellness Care Farm, run by a social worker. Julie Casey. I've been to visit there when I went to speak in Canada a while back. And she runs this farm where she brings in Native children, Aboriginal, Indigenous children from some of the local schools. And a lot of them do have trauma histories. And she does little groups and little nature walks and, outdoor art and various different things with them, and works also individually. So she does individual and group work with the children. We've, over these years, that since purchasing the farm in 2016, I've visited a lot of other farms that do similar things, both here in Montgomery County. There's in our county, Red Wiggler Farm, which is mostly crops, and they have about 16 individuals with special needs who work there. and there's one in North Carolina called the Farm at Penny Lane. There's several here in Montgomery County, believe it or not, but the Farm at Penny Lane in North Carolina is owned by UNC Chapel Hill,
Okay.
and their ACT program there in that Chatham County area is run through this Farm at Penny Lane. So
Okay.
it's very similar to those other green care farms
Yeah.
in that way.
So Montgomery County has a sweet spot in my heart. My aunt and uncle lived in Olney
Oh,
for
wow.
many years, so
Yeah.
I would take the bus from Pittsburgh to Olney
Wow.
quite often to spend time with them. Back
It's
when
a
it was,
lovely area, lovely area.
yeah. So when I was a little girl, it was very agricultural. And of
Yes.
course, now it's all urban, and you'd be hard pressed to recognize it as the same place.
Well, Olney
So,
itself, yes, you're right, has been built up, and
yeah,
a lot of single family homes and
yeah,
townhomes, and the little town there is now its own little like just like a
yeah.
yuppie place. We would call it back in the day yuppie.
Yep. Yep.
Um, but there's also several schools there, which are private schools that a lot of people
Mhm.
send their kids to. So it's
Okay.
really grown. Yeah, but
Yeah.
Montgomery County itself is 1/3 agricultural. It's a
Okay.
agricultural preserve. It has a third of the county just designated to that. So I always say to our local policymakers, look, you know, farming is a very gentle approach to life,
Yeah.
right? And there's no huge deadlines on a farm. You have to be safe and you have to
Mhm.
care for the land. But the rhythms of the land are slower
Yeah.
than the fast pace of like working in an office setting or in a
Yeah.
EMT or even
Yeah.
a vet clinic. Like
Yeah.
working on a farm is very gentle, and so putting in some vocational training for young
Mhm.
people at farms is one thing that I've often said we should be doing more
Yeah.
of.
Yeah. I
And
hear you.
yeah, we
Yeah.
have people who come and get student service learning hours for their schooling. I don't know where
Mhm.
you live, if the
I
children.
live in a very agricultural area too. If you've heard of the San Joaquin Valley in
Hmm.
California, 1/4 of the nation's food is grown here.
Wow, goodness gracious.
So, yeah, and I hate it during certain times of year with the different chemicals that are sprayed that I'm allergic to. It's
Wow.
like, but the farms are so vast. It's like, can
Right.
I hold my breath and get past this plot?
And too bad they're
And
using chemicals, because actually that's the one thing that Montgomery County, Maryland has a couple years ago decided they're going to do away with, which
yeah,
is all the
yeah.
glyphosate and the chemicals.
Well,
So,
I'm thinking what bothers me the most is what they put on the cotton crops.
mm,
So, because they spray them twice each season, once at the beginning and once at the end. But we really need to get focused on FASD, or my audience will ditch me.
so we'll go
So,
back to other
yes,
chemicals that we put in our bodies, in
yes,
addition to all of these that,
yeah,
the farming industry puts
yeah,
into our clothing and into our food systems.
yeah. So, you wrote this wonderful book, The Silent Epidemic, a child psychiatrist's journey beyond death row, understanding, treating, and preventing NDPAE. And I knew from the very first page that I would love this book.
Oh,
And it has not disappointed me, although I'm not as far as I would like to be, but I have 2 part-time jobs, the
oh,
business, the podcast. I just finished my book. I care for my mom. We
yeah. Wow.
have
You know what?
11 animals.
Oh, wow. Good for
It's a
you.
small
Yay.
condo.
Yay. Well, that's fabulous. And you have a very
So,
lovely backyard, I can see.
yeah, I
Very,
wish. There's not this much green where I live.
I would think so. I would think not. So
I
that's
if
hearkening to your days back east.
Yeah, yeah. And in fact, the first year I lived here, I put up a wallpaper mural on one wall of my kitchen, and it's like typical West Virginia.
Wow.
It's autumn, there's a big old barn, there's a paddle wheel with water, and I was thinking, I'm just going to feast my eyes on this when I get homesick.
That's awesome. I love it.
And
Well,
my,
Patty, so you've written a book too, which is exciting.
yeah,
Can't wait to get that. It just came out in September, right?
I was planning it for September 1 release, to coincide with International Awareness Month.
FASD.
So
Yeah.
it actually launched like a week before. So it's on Amazon and Kindle.
Wonderful.
If I ever get my money back out of the publishing costs, then I'll put it on Audible. But you can also order it in from local bookstores. If you like to support local business, then they can order it. But where I had, I've always liked to write. And I've just been on such an incredible journey these last 4 years since discovering that I too am on the spectrum that I had been studying in order to care for my foster youth that I care for. Um, Looking at the numbers, the diagnostic rate is so pathetically low.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So there are millions upon millions of people wandering around this country with no clue that their
Right.
struggles in life relate to prenatal brain injury,
Right.
right?
And
That it's not their
that,
fault.
right. And it's not their fault. And many people often say to me, well, why would you tell anybody that? And I'm like, well, because it's keeps them from feeling ashamed that there's
Exactly.
something wrong with them that they may have done, or that
Yeah.
they're, like they've
Yeah.
listened all these years to people telling them these horrible things about themselves. But
Yeah.
what about something happened to this person before they were even born? In some
Mm-hmm.
cases, before they were conceived. We know that
Yeah.
up to 75% of cases you can trace back to paternal preconceptional alcohol use, and there's
Mm-hmm.
lots of animal studies supporting this. It's really hard to get the comprehensive human data on it, but looking at,
There might be some ethical questions about that.
well, I mean, doing retrospective analysis,
Yeah.
you certainly can't do any type of clinical trials with people.
Right.
But my thing is, well, then why are we not talking more about this? And as you
Yeah.
said, if there are all these people walking around with it, now, if the same people were walking around, same numbers of people, which we suspect is about 1 in 20, somewhere
Mm-hmm.
between 1 to
Mm-hmm.
5%, there are populations that are higher, which
Mm-hmm.
the last estimates done in my, you know, recollection, looking at the data all the way back since, the 80s, the majority of cases are in, say, a lot of cases in Native American communities, and then African American. It's like 10 times higher in indigenous communities than in Caucasian communities, and it's 2 to 3 times higher in African American communities. But you look at systemic racism as the reason, because these systems have been established, like communities allowing liquor stores to be more
Mm-hmm.
prevalent in
Yeah.
communities of color. If they're not on the reservation, because that's dry, they'll have lining all around the reservation
Mm-hmm.
liquor stores as far as you can see.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
in African American communities, it's, you cannot find a healthy grocery store because of the food deserts.
But you
But
can find the bars.
every, not just bars, but
Yeah.
liquor stores, these
Yeah.
mom and pop, not even
Yeah.
owned by somebody that lives there. So we
Yeah.
ask, who decided how many of these liquor stores could be in a population base like that, or in a community so close to schools, so close to housing areas? Who decides that? Same people deciding now to let marijuana shops and
Mm-hmm.
vaping shops be so
Yeah.
close. And that
Yeah.
is the city planners
Yeah.
and the executives in these communities. meaning they're not people usually who live in those communities who are making those decisions. Then the people who get the permits to run those stores are also not people from those communities.
Yeah.
So yeah, looking at the numbers, why is it that more people don't know? I think the powers that be in the alcohol industry, I always call it #big alcohol, is no different than big tobacco. It's just that they learned many years ago how to handle the public response and the political response. So they decided early on to get into bed with all of the politicians, believe it or not. So there's a bunch of lobbyists which then block certain types of legislation that goes through. I know NoFast, or now FASD
United.
Yeah, I was on the board there for 11 years, and they have decided, like almost every year they're putting in these really great initiatives, legislative initiatives, and they're having so many people, working for them, trying to get these things passed. They get all these legislators signing on it, and then nothing ever, a lot of times
nothing ever gets done.
Right. It doesn't get passed because it's such a political hot topic. Really looking at it, it goes back to the lobby of the alcohol industry and just saying, okay, when are we going to get them out of the decision-making process? When are we going to allow the, public health people, like with COVID, if this many people were walking around with COVID that have
oh
this
my goodness,
condition, and we literally shut the country down for 18 months because of a communicable illness. But if we know this thing has been happening since way before Prohibition, right? It's been happening for probably 10,000 years, as long as we've fermented any type of alcohol. So now that we know that, we can change it. Yeah.
So you talked about that a little bit before we started recording, about that history from 10,000 years ago. And, as I listened to you, I was thinking, well, is it any wonder that there are passages in the Bible that warn against, excessive alcohol use or alcohol use during pregnancy? Is it any wonder? So I share with the listeners what you were telling me about that first community.
Well, and to be clear, I am Quaker. So, and I was raised actually in North Carolina, mostly Wesleyan Methodist. I've read the Bible, probably 12 times cover to cover, because that's what we did growing up, and it was like really good reading material on Sundays, for Sunday school. So, but if you go back in our history, human history, you look at the earliest human settlement that has been found where they have actually grown agricultural products. And it's in the this little town called Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, okay, modern Turkey. They found where these huge, it doesn't look like anybody lived there for any period of time. It looks like they were these stone structures that probably had wooden roofs, where the people would come together for ceremonies and gatherings. And it was late Neolithic period. So 10,000 years ago, late Neolithic. This would have been mostly hunters and gatherers coming in from all around. But they did find they were growing grain in very large amounts. It's the first time they found that type of settlement, you see. But in Göbekli Tepe, they found stone vats where they would ferment grain. And, they believed because of the grain alcohol that they were doing this, so that they would have beverages to serve for the people coming from all over for these feasts and these gatherings. So then if you take one step forward and you say, okay, so now we have our earliest known human settlement or settlements that were established for the purpose of these parties, these rituals, these gatherings, to really have various different people get to know each other and possibly go on and procreate, to have, children, together, because they were meeting up at these places. They probably knew by then, don't marry your sister. You gotta get together with other big groups of people to meet other people. So this was a way to have bonding and reproduction.
And
But
we're still using alcohol that way today.
And we're still using it that way today because it is a in a way it's a social lubricant.
I was just thinking that.
Yeah, that lowers people's arousal, so they're kind of calmer, they're not as anxious, and then it helps disinhibit if they were going to be inhibited. So you get the woman drunk and you carry her off by the hair of her head, or you sling her over your back and you take her to your village, and then she wakes up and she's like, where am I? And your dad arranged this. Oh, really? Well, now I'm stuck. And you see, we've been in this for however many generations, is my view. So then fast forward, you get the dawn of, let's say, enlightenment of humanity, where people like Moses and other religious philosophers came along, which I would call them that, right? Okay, some people say prophet. Yes, okay, call it that, but it's really, they were religious philosophers. So Moses goes up on the mountain, he gets the word, right? He strikes it into this tablet, or supposedly it is, I don't know if it's an alien or, supposedly God, which I do
finger
get.
of God. Yeah.
The finger of God writes it on the tablets. He comes down the mountain. He sees all these people having, orgies, dancing. They're in the middle of the desert. They're having a good old time. And what is at the crux of that is alcohol. They figured out a way to make alcohol, right? Wine. And so here they are dancing, parading around, this is what I remember from reading the Bible. And he gets so angry. What does he do? He breaks the tablets. Okay. And he says, look, this is what I was talking about. No fornicating, no doing this stuff. Now, in the 10 Commandments, it does not say do not drink alcohol.
Right.
Okay. Because in fact, every religion that I know about, except for Buddhism, and I'm not sure about that one, but, at least Christianity and Judaism, for the most part, like Catholics, have you do it every single Sunday. They give you alcohol every single Sunday. Well, why are they doing that? They give it to little kids if they want it. It's like, what? So in my practice, I always tell the families, if you're going to do that, you need to, just be clear that your child, if they were prenatally exposed, because a lot of the families that see me in my practice, they've adopted these children. I say, you need to, have a come to Jesus moment where you consider carefully your own use and all these social structures where it is socially sanctioned to use. And why do you think the Catholic Church would want that? I'm not condemning them. It's been going on since Catholicism first came into being. But why would they want people to drink alcohol every single Sunday? Oh, it's the blood of Jesus? Doesn't look like blood to me. I don't know. I don't want to get into that, right? But it smells like alcohol to me. And it seems to me that they want to keep people numb and dumb. So just give them a little bit of alcohol, say, oh, it's okay. A little bit's okay. It's the same thing that happens with OBGYNs, you see. They'll say to a woman, she comes in, largely women are not getting preconception advice. They don't go in preconceptionally when they really should, and say, hey, you need to be on a contraceptive till you're going to give up alcohol. You need to know this could affect the sperm production of your spouse, genetic factors. So the women come in to see the OBGYN when they're usually around 8 to 12 weeks. A lot of OBs won't see you before 12 weeks because 30% of pregnancies, believe it or not, end in spontaneous abortion. Most people did not realize that. Where the little fetus just demises, right? Because it was just not meant to be.
Yeah.
And there are probably a lot of lifestyle factors for why that is. But
I've often wondered, I mean,
yeah.
looking in my training with facets, there's a slide that they show with the windows of vulnerability, right? All the different body systems that are developing at various points in the pregnancy and making either the formation of the structure or the development of the specialization of those cells,
Right.
vulnerable to alcohol or any other teratogen, right? But in the first 2 weeks, there's nothing.
Well,
And
it's not that there's nothing. It's not that there's nothing.
In terms of the windows of vulnerability, right? It's just kind of all, squiggled out. And I'm thinking that's got to be spontaneous abortions right there.
Well, no, what that is. So this is called teratology, and it's neuroteratology. So by the time the egg is released, it takes about 2 weeks, 1 to 2 weeks for implantation to occur.
Right.
So you don't have the blood vessels going in. You don't have the placenta,
Gotcha.
even the basics of the placenta forming.
Okay.
But having said that, my former mentor, Dr. Kathy Sulik, who was a world-renowned teratologist, and if you do any research on who Dr. Kathy Sulik is, you'll see that she was one of the most eminent alcohol teratologists. Yeah, so her work went into the original Surgeon General's warning. She's since retired. She's retired probably about 4 or 5 years ago. But her work showed that it's those early stages, so late third week, early fourth week, that the face forms. So if you don't have a binge episode, 4 to 5 drinks in that little window, late third, early fourth week, you won't have the typical fetal alcohol face. So that's why it's 10 to 15% of the people who have that. But having said that, implantation, when that occurs, then right soon after that is gastrulation and neurulation. So all of these processes that you're talking about, the gastrulation is forming of your gut and neurulation is of your nervous system. And then everything else is laid out kind of around that and during that. But the reason the first 2 weeks is kind of a tricky thing is it's very hard for most people to pinpoint exactly what's going on in that first 2 weeks. And the reason that a lot of those charts say nothing is going on is they're outdated. It was before they were really able to do the type of research that could show things. Now we know that there's even preconceptional epigenetic factors. So it may just be that, facets could consult with someone who is heavily into the early developmental period. Dr. Scott Parnell is still at UNC Chapel Hill where I trained, and he took over Kathy Sulik's research lab. He was one of her postdocs. So, and he's spoken at a couple of conferences, as well as Kathy, that I've chaired at ACAP and APA. So he would be someone to reach out to and see, what they know. I know that a lot of his research now is focusing on marijuana as well. So looking at overlapping, phenomenon that occur when there's both used versus one or the other. But I hear your point, and that was also something that when I started teaching people about this many years ago, like all the way back to 93, I would say, well, don't worry about the first 2 weeks because we don't really know what's going on then. But I think a lot of people, that the window is also confusing because teratologists measure these effects from conception on, whereas the pregnancy dates based on an OBGYN is based on your last menstrual period. So that would be actually 2 weeks before conception. You see, dating your pregnancy based on the last menstrual period, your period happens, and then that egg gets flushed, okay? And then 2 weeks later, you re-ovulate, you see? So it's, and that's not a part of that 2-week window that you're talking about, because those charts are based on teratology dates, that it's conception.
So, and I know complicating things for as far as, discovery of pregnancy or confirmation of pregnancy, right?
Yes.
One of the effects of my exposure is that I kept changing my mind as to what I wanted to study. So I have a year and a half of nursing school under my belt. And in the maternity rotation, they told us, and of course, this is back in 81 or 82, that up to 1/3 of women continue having periods for a couple months into their pregnancy. So that's a much longer period of exposure prior to, oh my gosh, I've got to put the bottle away.
Well, and that's what I show. I have a little slide that I've animated this whole thing to show that most women who are actively using alcohol, because alcohol is estrogenic, it is one of those estrogenic compounds that in our body makes our whole reproductive system different. It's why breast cancers are more common in women who use alcohol. Okay.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah, so there's a lot that people don't know about alcohol. It's mutagenic, teratogenic, carcinogenic, hepatotoxic, neurotoxic. There's so many things, but the mutagenic potential is what then leads to the cancers and a lot of reproductive health cancers. But for women of childbearing age, it can make your periods irregular. So women who drink frequently and, like these 20-somethings, a lot of times their periods will be very irregular. So 20-somethings, 30-somethings, however old you are. And so you're right, Patty, that they would be using and then not know they're pregnant. And so later on, a doctor would say, and they'll shake their head when they say it, "You didn't use when you were pregnant, did you?" And she'll say, "No, I didn't use when I was pregnant," because she didn't use past pregnancy recognition. But pregnancy recognition was 9 weeks.
Yeah.
It's a big problem.
Yeah.
And a lot of women then are like, oh,
well, and also, I mean, the way that the doctors ask that is a leading question, and it conveys to the woman, tell me no, because I don't have time for a yes.
Well, and what I do, I have a 9-page questionnaire. You're right, Patty. I have a 9-page questionnaire that before the patients come into my office, the parents fill it out. I do a 90-minute session with the parents before I even see the child, and I get all their background records and that type of thing. But one of the questions I ask, it's a series of questions, really. It's, how old was the mother at the time of the pregnancy and the father? And was this a planned or mistimed pregnancy? So was it planned? Or was
I like that phrase.
Yeah, mistimed, because, some people would consider it, maybe an accident, or they might say, is it, unwanted? But, was it mistimed? And the other thing is there a chance, how much alcohol was the mom drinking really before pregnancy recognition, before she found out she was pregnant? Was there a chance that there was heavy use exposure before, even before pregnancy recognition, or, after? And I mean, I have to tell you, I had a psychologist who came to me one time. She was originally from Tennessee. She and her husband had moved here. She had a master's in psychology, had a big practice there, had 4 children. They moved here, and her husband had a government contract for his new business, which failed. Okay, that for some reason the contract fell through. He was walking around their house in his underwear and t-shirt. She had left this big practice she was running, out in Tennessee. So she was beside herself and found out she was pregnant and sat down and consumed a whole bottle of wine before, really getting to her senses. She was just so distraught. Well, 6 years later, she came to me asking, was this maybe the reason her son was struggling in school? And so I had volumes and volumes of research and literature and notebooks that I'd accumulated from workshops and training programs I'd attended. And I said, look, these are really special to me. They're very sacred. I will share them, but I would like you to bring them back at the next visit. Well, I never saw her again, never heard from her. Sent her, information asking for my materials back, never got them. So I've learned not to lead in with that information, even if they ask me.
Yeah.
Because first of all, I don't want to get burned.
Yeah.
Like that. But second, it's just not, I don't think, helpful. And that's why in my book, I talk about don't blame the mom. Do not blame the birth
I
mom.
say that all the time too.
Yeah. When in fact, we know that the alcohol industry itself is one of the biggest culprits in this problem. We know the government, I'm so sorry to tell you, could be doing more. We know how to rally the public about a global pandemic. Now, if these numbers are accurate, which the Centers for Disease Control is saying, and it truly is 1 in 20 individuals in grade schools in middle America with this problem, 1 in 20 children, these children grow up to have problems. Now, not many of them grow up to have as good a life as you do.
Yeah.
Many of them do end up with severe problems.
Yeah.
And homeless and,
Incarcerated,
incarcerated.
suicide.
Right. Suicide is very high in this population. Substance abuse. There are over 440 non-communicable illnesses associated with this condition. So a lot of them have fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, other problems. Anyway, so for moms, for birth moms, I mean, it's very hard because they do feel stigmatized. But if we could change the rhetoric and change the perspective and say, look, this is a global problem.
Yeah.
And what we now appreciate is that many of the children are neurodiverse, and it takes a long time to help the children establish themselves in society.
Yeah, it seems like we were starting to make some progress and some headway, and then fentanyl hit. And it's now it's like alcohol, who can be bothered?
Yeah.
Right? It's all about the fentanyl crisis.
The same thing happened
with cocaine.
Exactly, in the late 80s.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the thing is about fentanyl or any of these other things, I mean, I feel like it's it's an excuse more than it is a reality. Because if the government really wanted to do what they should be doing about this, they would go back to that warning that they put out in, I think it was 2015. They updated the U.S. Surgeon General's warning to say, if you're pregnant or planning to be, you need to avoid alcohol, and you need to contracept if you're using alcohol. And what happened is Twitter exploded with 30-something saying, how dare the government tell me how to, live my life and what to do with my body, which I can appreciate. Okay. But at the same time, you have to appreciate there was science behind that.
There's a
However,
reason why the
right.
advice was given.
But unfortunately, I believe the government didn't do enough to tell people why they were making that recommendation.
Yeah.
So on Twitter, when women would post this, like, how dare the government? And actually the CDC like almost retracted it. You can hardly find anything about it now. And I was on a town hall the week they put out that thing. And I said, yay, you for doing that. Because, you know, suddenly you've gotten balls. You know, good CDC that you are finally telling people the truth, which we've been trying to get out there since, you know, the late 80s, early 90s when Dr. Kathy Sulik showed this. Then I would get on Twitter and I would tell the people the science. I would send them the research and they would say, well, why didn't anybody say that? You know, so these women would say, well, no, I get it now, but why would you just come out with this proclamation? So with COVID, did we do that? No. We flooded the, you know, media with what this virus is, how it's transmitted, how it affects people, you know, what is the science, you know, right off the bench that we know about it. Like there were over 200 articles already published in mainstream journals by March. When they shut everything down, they had already fast-tracked 200 articles, at least 200 articles through.
And can we go back and revisit, right?
Yeah. Can we go back and tell people why this is important? Why is it that we need to promote awareness about this?
And similarly, I think the warning labels on the cigarette packages would probably be more effective, you know, other than low birth weight, if it said consuming this while pregnant will likely cause your child to have ADHD.
Yeah. Well, we know that as little as one drink a day has been associated with attention deficits. So they, you know, it's on average one drink a day. It's really 7 per week. And they say you can't really say that one alone is going to do it. But there are plenty of women that drink regularly. And to them, one drink is a Long Island iced tea, which do you know how many shots is in that? There's no tea in it, by the way. There's no legitimate, like,
Isn't it like 7?
It's six shots in a Long Island iced tea. If you have a different bartender, maybe he puts 7, but it's
no, I was thinking of Alabama Slammers. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I went back and looked at that, and that's enough in one drink to cause the full fetal alcohol syndrome if timed perfectly in the late 3rd, early 4th week post-conception. Think about how many men are drinking, and then their sperm are epigenetically modified. You know, 3 months prior to conception takes three months for the sperm to develop. And then we know that the zygotes that their dad drank preconceptionally are more susceptible to the female's use. So a lot of people don't really realize that. And that
spell that out a little bit for the audience.
Yeah, well, what I mean by that is that it takes 3 months for sperm to develop. And we now know that sperm have these epigenetic modifiers put on them, which is a carbon and 3 hydrogens. It's called a methyl group that is placed at certain places on the histone protein that the DNA wraps around. And these histone modifiers then will cause genes to either be turned on or off. Okay. So say it was a kind of genetically conserved gene that really isn't supposed to be turned on at a certain point, but the way that the carbon and 3 hydrogens, the methyl group, is placed on that histone protein, it allows the DNA to unwrap and to be transcribed. So it's, you know, transcribed into mRNA and then translated into protein. Those proteins that we're talking about can be serotonin, norepinephrine, dopamine. It can be all of our neuromodulatory chemicals, right? The neurotransmitters.
Which means that child would have difficulty regulating emotion.
Yeah, regulating
and
or even understanding.
responding to stress.
Right. And it's
Mhm.
not just those proteins. It could literally be any protein, but
Mhm.
so that's why a lot of our systems are affected.
Yeah.
But these are epigenetic changes which then are passed through the generations. It's not
Right.
just that generation. It is
Right.
generations to come are going to have that same epigenetic modifier.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
what that means then is that that child is vulnerable to the effects of that one little zygote, that implanted now
Mhm.
little ball of cells that is going to form the embryo and then going to go on to form the fetus and then the baby that's born. That little uh, zygote is vulnerable to the mother's use, more
Yeah.
vulnerable than it would be if there weren't those epigenetic modifiers. So we now know that
Gotcha.
there are things like that that are due to the father's use. There is
Mhm.
evidence from really good animal data. I think they have some large, they're not clinical trials, of course, but they're prospective studies showing that adolescents that use heavily epigenetically modify their progenitor cells so
Okay.
that that those same epigenetic changes can happen even if you use during your adolescent years. So these
Mhm.
adolescents that are going out drinking, having a big old time partying, it's illegal, but they're
Right.
still doing it.
Yeah.
Um, so how many people are telling adolescents that as a part of these curricula where they're trying to get them not to drink and how many health curricula even
Yeah.
include anything about this? And if it does, it's going to say about fetal alcohol, heavy
Mhm.
drinking. They're going to teach them about fetal alcohol syndrome, which is really only 10 to 15%
Right.
of the affected children. It's
Right.
not
Right.
all of the affected children.
Right. And a few weeks ago, like a month or so, we had National Impact Week in Washington, and Dr. Philip May was there. Did you go to that by any chance?
I am not, no,
You
I
didn't
haven't
make it this
attended
year?
those. And
So,
I don't tend to go anymore
okay.
since I'm no longer on the board.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in his speech, he updated his statistics to 1 in 15.
Mm,
So 6.7% instead of 5%. And so I crunched the numbers, and that translates to 15%. We can't really run with that until he publishes the study where he got that stat,
hmm
but that's super scary. And I was thinking, well, that's got to be the effect of the lockdowns. And, because alcohol sales went up 20%, but that research was done before COVID.
Yeah. I don't think
So,
it's bad. I think that they're just now getting to the point where they're willing to stand on the data that they already have because it's
mhm,
getting more and more solid. I think if this
yeah.
has been going on since Gobekli Tepe, 10,000 years, that we're bound to have way more than 6% of the population affected. And I
Mhm.
think many of our conditions that we know of, and we talked about this before we were doing
The
the
recording. Yeah.
recording, that it turns out that many conditions that are seen to be mental, quote unquote, mental illnesses, which I do not
Mhm.
like that term. I think it's a crass term.
Yeah.
These conditions that we know of as neurodiversity that
Mhm.
lead some people to have what's called personality disorders and
Mhm.
problems, engaging with peers and looking a little bit like on the autism spectrum.
Mhm.
um, Many of these people out there are people who had some degree of prenatal, preconceptional, or epigenetic changes.
Mhm.
Okay. So we're talking about epigenetics going back to, say, the grandfather 5 generations ago.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. And we knew that all the way back to Dr. Charles Stockard's work in the early 1900s. We
Yeah.
knew that there were these epigenetic effects. He didn't call them that.
Yeah.
And he was a eugenicist, which I despise, even talking about his work, but I did
Yeah.
purchase for about $35 several of his papers, 35 each, which you can get from the Cornell Medical Center,
Hmm.
where he was a professor. He said during Prohibition, look, why are you even doing that? Let alcohol flow through to the masses. It will reduce the racial degeneracy. So his paper was
Oh.
Alcohol as a Factor in Eliminating Racial Degeneracy. It was published in 1924, 4 years after Prohibition was
Hmm.
started. Brave New World came out in 1932, and in 1933, prohibition was repealed. So if you remember, and Ken Jones, speaking at a conference that he and I spoke together, Dr. Ken Jones mentioned Brave New World. So I went and read it. I had never
Hmm.
read it. It talks about creating a whole society of a caste system, social caste system, with giving embryos in the very early stages. It was written in 1932, remember? The philosopher that wrote it said, oh, we should create a society where babies are not born to women. We control their environment they're developing in. So we're going to take these cloned embryos and we're going to make some of them exposed to alcohol. They're going to be the factory workers. And a little bit below that, we're going to dose some of the others. So early on, we give alcohol into the flasks of these that are the clones that
Oh.
we want to just be factory workers. And he said, let's give a little alcohol in those early stages. And the ones we want to work in the uranium factories and the plants and digging out the uranium, we're going to zap with a little bit of X-rays and give them alcohol. And they're just
Wow.
going to be automatons. And then further up, the people in the middle class, let's do this. So it was alpha, beta, gamma, epsilon, and delta. Okay. And the middle class, you just want them following everybody's rules and doing everything that you're telling them. So they're going to be, okay, embryos. They're not going to be the best, but we're not going to give them any alcohol and zap them with anything because we want them to be able to follow the rules.
Hmm.
Um, and then the betas are going to support the alphas. And the alphas are going to be picked from the very best, cream of the crop. No two of them are going to be alike. And they're all going to be tall and beautiful. So you never read the book either, right?
No, he sounds absolutely evil.
Well, right. But remember, these are all eugenicists.
Yeah.
These are all
Yeah.
back in eugenics. So see,
Yeah.
eugenics was part of then what unleashed the alcohol back into the system. Because
Hmm.
and I'm not saying I'm in favor of prohibition, it did not work. But the
Yeah.
women who were pushing for prohibition were
Like my
called
grandmother.
the temperance movement. It was the
Yeah.
temperance movement, okay? And
Yeah.
they were bashing the saloons and the ale houses and all of that. They were like literally busting them down with hammers
Yeah.
because the men were not doing their job. They weren't doing
Yeah.
what they were supposed to do. And
Yeah.
so I mean, I think that what we have now, Patty, is not surprising,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
a society that's asleep
Hmm.
to this issue. They
Yeah.
are legitimately numb and dumb to the
Hmm.
effects of a very potent neuroteratogen,
Yeah.
toxin. It's a
Yeah.
neurotoxin. It's a chemical carcinogen.
Yeah.
It is a mutagen.
Yeah.
And so what I believe is that we could do a better job, all of us, at raising awareness, which I
Hmm.
really appreciate that you're doing. And
Yeah.
I don't have the
Yeah.
bandwidth to do podcasts. I get on podcasts all the time. It's not something I get paid for, but I'm out there, talking about this and, like you, trying to get more people to notice and to
Yeah.
care.
Yeah. Yeah. And we are just about out of time. This hour has disappeared. I would absolutely love it if you could grace the microphone with me again sometime.
I would love
So,
to, Patty. You're
yes.
such a delight. I'm going to read your book though before that point, I'll go ahead on Amazon. And I'm
And
glad to know that Audible is not that inaccessible. I haven't ever figured out how to get your book on Audible. I'd love to do that. I want to read my book. I
it's
have a little YouTube channel where I actually have started like just reading parts of the book, but I want to actually read it for Audible.
yeah, yeah. And I want to do that too. But so my book, I had a little bit of imposter syndrome, right? Thinking, what
Yeah.
on earth am I going to say that could compare to trying differently rather than harder?
Yeah, I know. I love her book too. I refer that
But
to families all the time.
one of my favorite books on trauma is called Conversations with a Rattlesnake.
Oh,
It's by and it's not a hugely scholarly piece, right? It's not like Bessel van Kolk or but it's by a Canadian therapist named Kim Barthel. I've been in a conference with her. She's fantastic. And one of her former clients, Theo Fleury, who is a Canadian hockey player, who the PTSD in his life, because he had every ace and then some.
yeah.
The PTSD was so severe, and the addictions and everything else was so severe that the NHL got rid of him. And the whole book is, I mean, you feel like a fly on the wall, literally listening to their conversation
Wow.
about trauma and all its effects and resiliency,
Attachment and yeah.
attachment, the whole bit. And it's every bit as thick of a book as yours. And I read it in less than 48 hours because I
Mm,
could not put it down.
mm,
And the idea hit me. I'm a person of faith, so I think it was an inspiration from on high. Use that model to educate about FASD.
mm,
And so I reached out to many other people who were diagnosed as adults with fetal alcohol spectrum because, I mean, and in one of the studies I read that's quoted in the preface, some researchers happened to say, thank God for the 99.9% of people who are undiagnosed. So hello, that means our diagnostic rate is 0.1%.
it is true. And next time, let's talk about
That's
diagnosis.
staggering. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because I know you
So
have a patient or a client. I have a
I
patient
do
actually in
in
my office.
in
We can
2 minutes.
yeah, yeah. So take
So
good care. And next time
yes.
we'll talk about diagnostics. Please do reach
Yeah.
back out. Friday mornings are a good time. So maybe we can connect. And
Yes.
thank you so much for this lovely opportunity and this lovely conversation.
I can't wait till the next one. Thank you. Thank
And
you.
we
Thank
will.
you. All
Okay.
right.
Bye-bye.
Bye. And to everyone else, I just want to welcome you back again next week for another episode of Living with FASD. This week just flew by. So don't forget to tune back into the YouTube channel at Patricia Casper, the your FASD coach, for a free Friday tidbit on the neurobehavioral model on Friday morning, and come back here again on Monday next week for another episode of Living with FASD. Thank you so much, everyone. Be blessed. Have a great week. Bye-bye.